Hi, and welcome to the second Spectrum-themed episode of my Nostalgia Trip games. If you want to see what sort of equipment I've been using in the making of this episode, please see to episode number 3, which was the first Spectrum-themed episode. So, without further ado, let's get on with it.
Well, it was inevitable that Manic Miner would be mentioned at some point in the Spectrum lists, so I figured I might as well do it now just to get it over with. But even though Manic Miner was, and is, released on practically all the 8-bits imaginable, there's one particular reason to have Manic Miner on the Spectrum list, and that's the simple fact that it originated on the ZX Spectrum. For more reasons than that, though, I have no intention of including Manic Miner on any other list. The weird thing about Manic Miner is that it was released with 3 different covers. The Whistler cover is apparently the most sought after, and I agree it's the most iconic of the 3, and it's also the most fitting for the game. I have no recollection of which of the covers I saw first, but one of our friends had the game as an original, and my strongest memory of the original tape was the print on the tape itself, which is what I based my eventual retro purchase on. Of course, the tape our friend had was borrowed, and inevitably the game was copied onto one of our C60 recordable cassettes. The iconic status of the ZX Spectrum version of Manic Miner goes all the way to the loading screen. While the design of the loading screen is simple, being only flash alternating large, colorful letters that switch between the 2 words, Manic and Miner, it was memorable from the first sight. The title screen was completely bonkers back then, with the screaming version of Blue the Noob played on the virtual piano on the screen. Of course, the real wonder was the inclusion of what has been claimed to be the first in-game tune ever in a computer game, the staccato rendition of a looped excerpt of In the Hall of the Mountain King. Add 20 increasingly difficult single-room levels to jump through, memorable graphics, and a Python-esque game-over screen to all of that, and there's an instant classic. Ever since I've been playing Manic Miner, which I still do quite often, I have only managed to make it to room 14, I think. It's annoyingly addictive. I have strong beliefs of this game being the first sports game that I ever played. If not quite the first, then at least the first multi-event sports game. Daley Thompson Super Test had 2 separate releases for the 48K Spectrum and the 128K Spectrum. The 48K version features 8 events and is split in half and requires both parts loaded in separately, whereas the 128K version has 12 events loaded in at once and features a Y-chip music. The game's page at the World of Spectrum website has a quoted remark of the game's other writer, Jonathan Smith, saying that most of the game's code was based on an earlier game they made, Hypersports, because it needed to be done in a hurry. Well, perhaps so, but I always thought Daley Thompson Super Test was always the more interesting game of the 2. At least the events are a bit less often used. You get football penalties, ski jumping, cycling, diving, pistol shooting, giant slalom, and even tug of war between the more common events. Sure, it's not the most comfortable of sports games, but it's an interesting alternative, and as you might have guessed, I tend to revisit this quite a lot. If you're a C64 gamer and possibly a fan of Monty on the Run for more reasons than its soundtrack, which is awesome by the way, there could be a slight chance that you might not have known that the origins of the game's design are in the ZX Spectrum version of Wanted Monty Mole. Yes, there's a C64 version of this game as well, but I always thought it considerably inferior. Peter Harrop's Monty Mole on the Spectrum is a flip-screen platforming adventure in a large and spacious underground maze with 3 lives instantly taken upon collision to enemies, whereas Anthony Crowther's C64 Monty is a scrolling platformer in a confined and narrow underground maze with a single life with an energy bar, which becomes useless when you get trapped in a pit with spikes or something. Again, I have never actually completed either version, but the Spectrum Monty is definitely the more playable one. If you want to read more about the two versions, click on the link below the video description to the comparison of this game, doubled with Potty Pigeon, that I made in the very beginning of the comparison blog in August 2013. Something none of the 8-bit home computers were ever particularly good at, with a few exceptions, was racing games that were viewed from behind the racer. The Spectrum had some surprisingly good arcade conversions, of which Enduro Racer is a good example, and one I used to play quite a lot back in the day. Sure, the monochrome graphics with harsh scaling can be a bit off-putting now, but it's still a few notches above the atrocious C64 version. The sounds on the 48K beeper aren't particularly inviting either, but load the game up on a 128K Specky and you'll get some AY music to go with the beeping. Nice. However your glasses are tinted in rose, you can't escape the fact that even on a Spectrum, Enduro Racer is practically an impossible game to beat. You need to learn the segments to be played completely by heart in order to dodge all the obstacles, and even then, keeping your speed through all the jumps is more a matter of luck more than skill. So once again, it's a badly aged game, but remains a firm nostalgia trip for me. Again, the final game for this episode is from the first batch of games that we got with our original used 48K Spectrum. But first, a few words about the game's hero. Horace was, in a way, an early attempt at having a mascot on a home computer, much like Pac-Man and Mario were for the Atari and Nintendo respectively. This blue guy with big empty eyes even managed to fill that slot for a bit before, Monty Mole and Miner Willie came to join the club. The first two Horace games are Hungry Horace, which is basically a weird Pac-Man clone, and Horace Goes Skiing, which combines Frogger and practically any slalom game you can think of. The third game in the trilogy, Horace and the Spiders, was for a long time the only game of the three that I had the dubious honor to have played. This game has three distinctively different parts in it. One, a basic forced movement platformer in which you jump over oncoming spiders. Two, a rope jumping segment in which you need to jump through a series of spiderweb ropes to the other side of the chasm. And three, a space panic type segment in which you make holes into a web in order to trap the wandering spiders and stomp them down. Naturally, the game gets more difficult the more times you solve the whole sequence. It's not a particularly well constructed game, nor is it very playable, but it has some weird charm that calls me back every now and then. It's a definitive nostalgia trip game.